Hello and welcome to the Voice of Iron. And in this session, I'll be reading and ranting about the Blackjack medium Battlemech. First, I'll be going over the canon information that we have from SARNA.net, and then I'll be giving my personal thoughts and experiences with this mech. Description: The Blackjack was designed by General Motors in the decades before the fall of the Star League, as seditious revolutionaries began popping up while the League's authority was eroding, mainly in the periphery. In 2757, to combat the increasing threats of the Separatists, the League contracted for a medium battlemech to be built with anti-insurgency and fire support capabilities. General Motors' original prototype was equipped with a large fusion engine, supplying increased speed and endurance and flamer weapons, but these were eventually replaced with more reliable autocannons and a smaller engine supported by jump jets. The final production model met all of the production requirements and, by all accounts, was destined to be regarded as a good, reliable mech. General Motors was blindsided by the bad press the Blackjack received upon its introduction. Chief among its critics was the charge that the Starguard II armor was brittle and tended to fall off, and that its foot pads were too narrow and made it susceptible to falling. None of these claims were ever substantiated, but the damage was already done, and as a result, the Blackjack quickly fell out of favor and only spent a few years in the service of the Star League. It wasn't long before production was halted altogether. Those still in service were either given to the Terran hegemony militia units or sold off to the member states. When the Star League was eventually dissolved and the succession wars began, few shed a tear as the Blackjack production line on Cathil was destroyed in 2796. While all the successor states had Blackjacks, the majority ended up with the Capellan Confederation and Federated Sons, and all but the Sons largely abandoned the design based on its reputation. Tinkering with the mech, Davian techs soon discovered that the reputed claims about the Blackjack's flaws were without foundation, although it was still largely relegated to March militias. It wouldn't be until 3022 that the myth received its first mortal wound on Josha 7. In battle for control of the planet, the infamous Tai Mercer Ravanian attempted to test his horde tactic against the local Davian garrison. Led by New Avalon Institute of Science cadet Michael Ubodo, the garrison's Blackjacks took the brunt of the Cretan attack, destroying wave after wave of light mechs attempting to overwhelm their position, and earned great honor for their successful defense. In the aftermath of the battle, other Davian units began to take renewed notice of the Blackjack, and even Hans Davian was sufficiently impressed with their performance on Josha 7 to commission new variants to be built. For their part, the Confederation continued to treat the design with utter contempt, although the breakaway nation of the St. Ives Compact couldn't afford to be as discerning and adopted the Blackjack, experimenting with new variants of their own. These efforts culminated in the introduction of the BJ-2, built by Davian techs using newly recovered Lost Tech, which was first a refit kit before limited production restarted at General Motors' Cathil plant in 3054. Further variants would continue to be produced by both St. Ives and the Federated Sons, and eventually a new Omni-Mech version of the Blackjack was completed in 3058. Weapons and equipment. The Blackjack carries a 40mm Whirlwind L AC-2 in either arm for long-range direct fire support. While these autocannons provide excellent reach and were sufficient for combating mostly non-mech insurgents, they lacked the firepower to deal with well-armored targets. Both weapons are fed from a single ton of ammo located within the center torso. For close combat, the Blackjack has 4 Intech medium lasers, one in each arm and both the left and right sides of the torso. These lasers, when combined with its maneuverability, make the mech very dangerous, and an entire lance or company of Blackjacks can lay down impressive firepower. 4 Whitworth Jetlift jump jets, located in the legs, give the Blackjack a jumping distance of 120 meters. These were added late in the design's development, compensating for using the GM180 fusion engine, which was smaller than the original. Finally, 8.5 tons of armor protect the Blackjack, while 11 single heatsinks keep it cool during combat. Variants. The BJ-1X. Early Blackjack prototypes differed from the production model significantly. They were armed with twin GM flashpoint flamers and additional heatsinks in place of each autocannon, and were powered by a Vox 225 power plant, allowing for greater speed than the later models, but lacked the jump jets. The BJ-1DB. The 1DB Blackjack is a Federated Suns variant intended to increase the mech's lethality. Introduced in 3022 after the BJ-1's success on Josha 7, 1 ton of armor, plus the arm-mounted autocannons and torso-mounted lasers, were replaced with 2 large lasers and 6 extra single heat sinks added to the design to handle the extra heat load. The BJ-1 DC. The 1DC Blackjack is another variant inspired by the Josha 7 battle and was introduced a year after the similar 1DB. Rather than replace the arm-mounted weapons, the 1DC sacrifices the mech's jumping ability in order to add 2 small lasers and an additional heatsink to deal with the extra heat load. What? The BJ-2. The BJ-2 was introduced in 3052 by the Federated Suns as the new production model of the Blackjack, based on earlier experimental designs. It upgrades the mech with 2 diverse optics Sunbeam ER large lasers in place of the autocannons, and removes the medium lasers for 4 Hovertech Streak SRM-2 launchers, 2 each in the left and right sides of the torso. 1 ton of ammo for the launchers is kept in the left torso, while the single heatsinks were upgraded to double heatsinks. The BJ-2R. Introduced in the Dark Age, this Blackjack variant replaces the weaponry of the BJ-2 with a large re-engineered laser in each arm, backed up by a single medium laser. It can jump 120 meters at a time, and uses 11 double heatsinks. The BJ-3. Built in 3042 by the Capellan Confederation on St. Ives, based on the experimental BJ-3X created during the Fourth Succession War, this mech was probably the first in decades, if not centuries, to feature double heatsinks, a revolutionary, rediscovered technology. It is implied that the heatsinks were actually stolen from the Federated Suns and Lyran Commonwealth, but in any case, the BJ-3 was the first regular variant to employ them again as part of its standard loadout, as opposed to field refits or ancient Star League era mechs. The superior heat dissipation allowed the mech to be equipped with 2 Series Arms Smasher PPCs and 4 medium lasers. The majority of the BJ-3 models were turned over to the Federated Suns by the St. Ives Compact after the Fourth Succession War, following the state's secession from the Confederation during the war. But production continued domestically within the St. Ives Compact, predominantly but not exclusively for St. Ives Compact forces afterwards. The BJ-3X. The St. Ives Compact prototype version of the production model BJ-3. It differs only by mounting 3 prototype double heatsinks, plus 7 engine-mounted single heatsinks. The BJ-4. Many Blackjacks in the Federated Suns were upgraded to this model during the FedCom Civil War. A half-ton of armor is removed, though the remaining is upgraded to light ferrofibrous, resulting in almost the same amount of armor protection. All the weapons of the BJ-2 were stripped out and a light fusion engine was added to free up additional mass. Each arm mounts a light autocannon 5 and an ER medium laser, while 2 tons of case-protected ammo in each torso allow the BJ-4 to make use of special munitions. A targeting computer makes all the weapons more accurate. The BJ-5. Introduced in 3107, this variant carries 4 light PPCs and 2 light AC-2s to extend the Blackjack's engagement range. To make room for this, the mech uses endo-steel chassis, light engine, and light ferrofibrous armor. A single ton of autocannon ammunition is stored in a Case 2 protected bay. And finally, the Blackjack C. A Clantech refit, equipped similarly to the BJ-2, this variant carries a large pulse laser in each arm and a Streak SRM-2 in each side torso. The ammunition for the missile launchers is carried on the left torso, protected by a Case 2 system. The mech also sports double heatsinks and ferrofibrous armor. The Blackjack only had one design quirk for all of its variants, and that was the bad reputation quirk at least up until the clan invasion era. And now, personal notes. The first experience I ever had with a blackjack was not me piloting one, but rather facing one down on the table. My opponent admitted that the blackjack was not the best mech, and, well, most people in the fanbase tend to know that the AC-2 is not exactly a great weapon. So when he deployed his, as part of his Capellan lance, I moved forward with my Steiner lance with my stalker in the back, commanding. First turn, before any of my weapons got into range, any of them, an AC-2 round streaked across the battlefield and struck my cockpit on my command mech. Now, it didn't penetrate, but it did wake me up, at the very least, to the potential that the blackjack had. Was it a lucky shot? Yeah, absolutely. But nonetheless, the fact that this little thing had already gotten a headshot in my first ever encounter with it automatically raised an eyebrow. I once saw someone online say that the blackjack, despite being a terrible mech, always seems to overperform for them on the table. And in my personal experience, the blackjack has been quite the pleasant surprise. In terms of the positives of this thing, the BJ-1 is a surprisingly good sniper, given how little damage the AC-2 actually does. Being able to shoot from a distance and get to a high vantage point with those jump jets is really useful. This thing is fantastic for demolition contracts, stay in the back line, spot for air support and allies, and using AC-2s to demolish structures I can see from a safe distance. And I found that the jump jets make this thing great for not only getting up to vantage points or spotting and sniping, but also fantastic for hiding among terrain when something gets into my medium laser range. So this thing is shockingly very, very useful in those regards. That said, it has its drawbacks. For an AC-2 platform, the default BJ-1 doesn't have much ammo for them. Not enough to stay long, that is. My first upgrade to this thing was to strip out that extra 11th heatsink and slap another ton of AC-2 ammo into it instead. Admittedly, you can make this thing a lot better in MechWarrior 5 Mercenaries than you can on the tabletop by default. I mean, sure, there's ways to upgrade it on the table, but if you're just playing typical game of armored combat, AC-2s are AC-2s, whereas you can kind of upgrade the damage from ballistics in the game and whatnot, and theoretically in lore as well, with better ammunition. I mean, heck, with optional ammunition rules on the table, this thing can be pretty darn good too. But regardless, 6 tons per AC-2 is a pretty heavy weapon for something that only deals 2 damage, even if it has incredible range. But I've noticed that this thing shines most with its 4 medium lasers, and using those AC-2s to plink and grab the attention of enemies from a distance. As I mentioned on demolition contracts, it's phenomenal. And again, as an anti-aircraft platform and as a platform for taking down tanks and especially soft targets, this thing is pretty scary. I mean, makes sense, given that that was the original Star League contract after all, helping to fight against periphery insurgents and whatnot, who are mostly just going to have VTOLs, tanks, hovercraft, and, of course, personnel. But that said, this thing is actually a lot of fun to pilot. 64 kilometers per hour is fairly slow for something of 45 tons, but that said, I think it actually uses it pretty well, despite the AC-2 investment. Again, that's pretty good at grabbing attention and plinking, and if upgraded or using proper ammunition, they can actually get a little scary, but if something does manage to get anywhere near you, or if you manage to jump into cover or get around behind someone or whip around with your jump jets, you're able to unleash 4 medium lasers on someone without going too far into the red heat-wise, and even then you can only fire 3 or maybe 2 if you're really worried about accruing too much heat. And at 5 damage a pop, that's nothing to sneeze at. Sure, a javelin can put out that much damage just the same, but this thing also has the range and ability to keep people at a distance until such a time as those medium lasers need to come into play. I've been playing through more MechWarrior 5 with the Blackjack in order to really get a feel for this thing so that I could give my real thoughts on it. And again, looking at the data raw, I thought this thing's not going to be very good. I'm going to have to challenge myself. I'm not saying that it was a great mech, but what I'm saying is that I actually really like this plucky little thing. It's more than capable than I expected it to be. It seems to be a lot luckier than most other mechs, which I know is not something that you can put in numbers. It's not something that you can put down as definitely bringing to the table, but I don't know. I've had way more success with a Blackjack than I should have. It's a bit like staunch urban mech pilots, you know? Something about the Blackjack is kind of inspiring. And again, if you actually do use a decent amount of strategy, and especially if you're playing mixed tech, where you're bringing infantry and tanks and aerospace especially, the Blackjack's actually pretty useful. It's just another case of you really gotta know what you're bringing this mech for. Is it gonna be a mech pilot's first choice? Oh, probably not. The 40 to 45 ton weight bracket is really, really weird, especially in the original 3025 TRO, and even as we get up into the clan era, it's kind of a wonky little area. But to the same degree, this thing does pretty good given its peers. And honestly, if you've never driven a Blackjack or brought one onto the table, give this thing a shot at least once. Pull up Mega Mech, take a couple of Blackjacks, try and take something down, especially if aircraft are involved or you're trying to take down some structures or mixed tech. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised by exactly what this thing can do. Oh, and if you try and sneak up on one of these things, beware those medium lasers. They really can hurt. Your best bet is to snipe this thing with a high damage weapon from a distance, but remember, if you can see it, it can see you. Those AC2s might not do too much damage, but consistency beats firepower over time. So just remember that. Anyway, that's all I've got to say for this particular mech, and thank you for listening to my voice.